Most of you know who I am, so I don't want to give a lot about my background, but I did want to share just two vignettes about why I feel strongly about progressive education before I even realized it. And some of you may have heard this story, but I was a fifth grader in Mr. Shearer's class in 1975 or 6, something like that. And you can do the math. And we were studying the Amish. And the class down the hall was studying the Amish too. They were reading books about the Amish and writing papers about the Amish. But we were doing that too. But we were dressing up as the Amish. We were making Amish food. We were performing our Amish music. We had Amish visitors come to our class. We spent a day at Mr. Shearer, lived on a farm. In those days, teachers could afford farms. But he lived on a farm, and we sort of replicated what an Amish farm might have been like. I can't really tell you anything that I learned. I remember one girl in my class throwing up one day. But other than that, I don't remember anything about fifth grade in Mr. Shearer's class except the unit we did on the Amish. And to this day, I feel like I'm better informed about the Amish than most non-Amish people in society. Another one is I was in 11th grade U.S. History at Wayland High School in Wayland, Massachusetts. I was in AP U.S. History. We had spent the entire year getting ready for the test. And it was a great class, great teacher. And what happens often in a public school is you take the AP exam. I don't know if they still do this, but the AP exams are given sort of in the beginning or middle of May. And you still have about a month or even more. I think we had about 5 weeks of school left. And Mr. McCoy looked out at us. He said, you know, what do you want to do? We've got all this time. We've taken the test. We could keep doing what we're doing. And we started throwing around some ideas. And I grew up in the town of Wayland, which was a little colonial town west of Boston. And we decided that a woman had recently written a book about the history of the town. I think it was called A Puritan Village. And we decided to go interview this woman and see if we could learn some things about the history of Wayland that we would want to find out more about. And ultimately what happened was we spent those 5 weeks making our own documentary about the history of our town that we presented at town meeting. We divided up into tasks. It may come as no surprise that I was an editor and writer, but we had photographers, interviewers, we worked all together, and we produced something that had value beyond the walls of Wayland High School. It was something that became a prized possession for the town. It wasn't as polished as what our kids produce on iMovie today, but it took a lot of collaboration and hard work, and it was an authentic piece of learning. It's something I look back on a lot and wonder about, did I learn more in those 5 weeks than I learned the rest of the year? And I think that may be true. Just in terms of my own background, I went through the Brown Master of Arts in Teaching program at the time when Ted Sizer was the chair of the education department at Brown, and so that's how I got connected to Ted Sizer and how I ultimately ended up working with the Coalition of Essential Schools and meeting up with people like Bob and heads of schools all over the country, and also doing a lot of work with public schools, because the majority of schools that were associated with the coalition were public schools. There really were only 19 or 20 independent schools across the country that had signed on and joined the coalition. And at that time, the Coalition of Essential Schools was actually based at Brown University. And then after that, and after working in a school, what I did was I left the MAT program. When I graduated, I went to work in one of those 20 schools. It was a school called Brimmer and May, which was an independent school. It was a pre-K through 12th grade. I taught 7th through 12th grade history at a school that was a member of the coalition. And what we were doing was really trying hard to implement Ted Sizer's ideas. And that school still exists today and is still a very vibrant program, a very progressive program outside of Boston. And then after that, I ended up working for the coalition, the Annenberg Institute for School Reform, which was doing similar work, and ended up working on my doctorate. And during the time I worked on my doctorate, I continued to do consulting with schools, really working to increase, we're trying to help schools to increase the opportunities for kids to have the kinds of authentic learning experiences that I'm just describing, to raise the conversation among adults. And I was going to share one story. I've told some people this story. I was in Norfolk, Virginia, and this will lead us into further discussion about ways in which what we're proposing is at odds with some of the current trends in education. I was in one of the high schools in Norfolk, Virginia, doing some consulting work, and I sat in on a terrific 10th grade chemistry class. The kids they were measuring viscosity of different liquids, and I'm not a scientist, I say, but it was very interesting. They were looking at shampoos and conditioners, again, not a topic I'm that familiar with. Anyway, I sat down with the teacher afterwards, and it was the class that was in mid-May, and I said to her, what a terrific class, tell me about it. And she said, yes, that's the first time we've studied chemistry, the first time we've really had a great chemistry class all year. And I looked at her and said, well, what are you talking about? It's mid-May, you've been teaching the kids since September. What have you been doing since September? And she said, well, we've been studying and getting ready to take a test about chemistry. And that really hit home, and I found that in a lot of the schools, sort of the perverse effects of some of the testing climate on kids and on what teachers felt they could and couldn't do in classes.